Remember when almost every game was set on a tropical island? Why was that? If you had a controller and/or sentience in the 2000s, you'd be familiar with Far Cry, Super Mario Sunshine, and Final Fantasy X. There's actually a surprising reason for their tropical theme, but we'll come back to that later. At the time, maybe you were PS2 pilled, or found truth on the first sacred ring of Halo. You might also remember when menus were more than just advertisements for an item shop or a completely different game. If you can hear either of these images, you might know what I'm getting at. The point is, games in the 2000s didn't just feel different, they looked different. And yes, this goes a lot deeper than graphical limitations. We got some of the most iconic character designs, weapons, and settings, and also some of the worst. Anyway, grab some low poly snacks and put on aquatic ambience, because we're about to go way back to try and find out why. I'm sure you've seen these low poly PS2 filters floating around online. They're made to emulate the look of games like Resident Evil 4, Kingdom Hearts, and Grand Theft Auto. While this might seem like just another trend, there's a big reason people are still so obsessed with this look. So why are objectively worse graphics back in fashion? First, we've got to understand why games looked like this in the first place. Time to talk triangles. In 3D games, polygons are the tiles that make up all of the objects you see and interact with. The more of these you have stuck together, the smoother something looks. For reference, Lara Croft used to be made up of about 200. Nowadays, you'd need at least 100,000. More polygons also equals more detail. It's largely why food no longer looks like a handful of pixels, being far more complex and realistic. With that being said, comment which one of these looks more delicious. Anyway, it wasn't as simple as slapping more polygons together. In the 2000s, consoles and hardware weren't able to process that many at once. Imagine trying to play Red Dead Redemption 2 on a PlayStation 2. It's just not happening. Instead, they had to get creative with what they had, and every polygon counted. They were making worlds with less, but trying to make them feel like more. To get around these restrictions, artists would use a couple interesting techniques. The most iconic of these is cell shading. This kind of replicates the feel of hand-drawn comic book style artwork, and can be seen in games like Jet Set Radio and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. By using this style, game studios could add personality to their world and its inhabitants, while still staying within any technical limitations. Jet Set Radio, from the year 2000, is regarded as being the first game to utilize this technique on a large scale. It actually won several awards for this, with its vibrant and unique world design. Unsurprisingly, nostalgia isn't the only reason that people fell in love with low poly games. I believe a lot of their charm is in their simplicity. While environments like this are less detailed and less full, they can make gameplay more engaging for a very simple reason. And that is, our brains love to fill in the gaps. When we encounter a low poly environment, we instinctively use our imagination to add the missing details. It's similar to when you have, say, a silent playable character and you start projecting your own thoughts or personality onto them. This process lets us engage with the world on a deeper, more personal level. So, just like developers, low poly simplicity does invite our creativity. It's partly why people remember childhood games as being much more detailed than they actually were. Less complex environments also means that elements like gameplay, story, and character take center stage. And if you're only working with a few thousand polygons, your protagonist has to have very distinct features. Think about Link's hat, Master Chief's helmet, or Mario's moustache. Most of these started as only a few pixels, but have retained their iconic look all the way up until today. Personally, as graphics have advanced, I think we've lost a lot of the charm that made these early characters so recognizable. Back then, bold and exaggerated features were necessary, giving them a timeless, instantly recognizable appeal. This, and the continued interest in low poly aesthetics, shows that sometimes less is more. From the crystalline waters of Spira to the beaches of the Emerald Coast, so many games used to take place in the tropics. There's been some pretty interesting theories as to why this was, but let's go over a couple of examples first. Final Fantasy X was released in 2001, with Tidus and Yuna exploring the world of Spira. This consisted of various tropical islands with forests, temples, and an endless expanse of blue seas. Locations felt calm and serene, having a refreshing and mystical feel. For many people, this is the best setting in the franchise. It looks vastly different to titles like Final Fantasy VII and the cancelled Final Fantasy Versus, which showcased a darker, grungier tone. Moving on, 2002's Super Mario Sunshine exemplifies this tropical beach obsession. Taking place on Isle Delfino, it came complete with lush green hills, palm trees, and Gelato Beach. Unsurprisingly, water-based mechanics made up a sizable portion of the gameplay, with lily pad levels and Flood, a water-propelled jetpack. Regardless, the game wasn't without its controversies. It moved away from the traditional use of multiple biomes and worlds being only a single location. While the different levels did keep things interesting, people still found the transition weird and the gameplay kind of repetitive. Still, this is the minority and it's even recently been remastered. Other honourable mentions include The Wind Waker and Kingdom Hearts 2. Before we get a bit game theory, the obvious reason for these environments and the prevalence of the ocean is that, well, it was possible. Simulating splashes, ripples, and dynamic water is not easy, and it was only just becoming accessible in the early 2000s. Studios were saying goodbye to the chunky water of the 90s and welcoming in the moist horizons of the new millennium. Having a good system became a key benchmark for quality. In turn, oceans stopped needing to be only backgrounds or death barriers, and could just as easily be interactive set pieces instead. Now, you might have noticed a common thread across the games I've mentioned, namely that they are all made by Japanese developers. This isn't to say that Western games never had these environments, but their use definitely leaned in one direction. In line with this, it's possible that a lot of inspiration came from the country itself. The lead writer of Final Fantasy X, for example, notes that a trip to Okinawa was heavily inspirational. When comparing locations, this makes a lot more sense. Others have taken this a step further, suggesting that vacations to Hawaii inspired a lot of development teams. Whatever the case, I miss the tropical focus of the 6th generation, and always love seeing these environments whenever they pop up today. On the flip side of the calm, tropical aesthetic I mentioned earlier was a weird fascination with making everything dark and edgy. Prince of Persia went from this to this, and Sonic had a similar shift. Outside of existing series, we got titles like The Force Unleashed and Manhunt, all sharing a darker colour palette. It's tricky to pinpoint an exact time period for this, but you won't find a shortage in early PS2 titles. Almost every second box art had orange, post-apocalyptic skies in the background, with the protagonist absolutely mean-mugging in the centre. The weird thing is, this wasn't just shooters or games like Mortal Kombat. Platformers were in on it as well. Jak and Daxter started the decade as a whimsical, light-hearted game with goofy characters. By 2003, Jak had a gun, a goatee, and was shooting his way through an industrial cityscape. The same can be said for Shadow the Hedgehog, which was an unexpected shift for the franchise. I mean, the menu select sound is literally a gunshot. If you grew up playing the original games on, well, the Genesis, randomly giving one of the characters guns was very out of place. Consequently, to many, it seemed like the developers were just trying to chase the trend of violently edging, coming across as cringe and inauthentic. On the other hand, some people did like this tone and the game got them into the franchise in the first place. Anyway, was there a reason for this switch? The answer is yes, but it depends on who you ask. Some people point to the fade of futurism and excitement for the year 2000. Certain events transpired at the start of the decade that stifled any optimism for the future, which definitely influenced the atmosphere of film and media at the time. Others suggest that the gaming industry was trying to come across as more mature. Games weren't just for kids, and the people who grew up playing on these consoles were becoming teenagers and adults. It made sense then to provide edgier content that looked cooler and took itself more seriously. This proved to be viable, and you can see this in the fact that an M-rated shooter shipped as Xbox's launch title. Before we dive any deeper and things get even weirder, a quick word from today's sponsor. Speaking of navigating digital worlds, it's important to make sure your own are private and secure. A big thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video and making this process extremely easy. No, seriously. With Quick Connect, you can hide your IP and change locations in a single click. For all intents and purposes, I'm currently living in the UK. This allows me to easily watch shows like Top Gear, which otherwise would have been expensive, illegal, difficult, or all of the above, and no one has time for that. But the benefits don't stop there. If, like me, you're juggling work, study, and gaming, you probably have a couple devices that you'd like to keep away from prying eyes. With unlimited devices for each subscription, Surfshark has just the thing for this. One login and you can keep everything safe and private. You could be watching region-locked K-dramas on your MacBook and Canadian Netflix on your PC. If you still aren't convinced, Surfshark offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so you can give it a spin before committing to a subscription. It's never been easier to protect your online activity, and now is a great time to start. With code EXTRAMINT, I've secured you an extra 4 months for free. Click the link in the description to learn more. I haven't mentioned Frutiger Aero for a while, and I'm starting to experience withdrawals. So here we are. In a gaming context, the aesthetic Frutiger Aero is mostly associated with the 7th generation of consoles, starting in 2005. Things like the Wii, Xbox 360, and the PlayStation 3. Frequent elements were gradients, glossy textures, and skeuomorphism. Skeuomorphism is often used with Frutiger Aero, and it refers to a style of graphic design that tries to imitate real-world counterparts of logos and apps. The best example I can give is iOS 5 and its icons. A cooler example I can give, however, is the Wii. After its release in 2006, interactive gaming was never the same. The nunchucks and the remote allowed you to putt, bowl, swing, serve, and beat your family members like nothing else. While the Xbox 360 was red ringing to death, it dominated sales, moving over 100 million consoles worldwide. Importantly, the UI, games, and music are remembered as being distinctly Frutiger Aero. Menus were clean and white, with a futuristic blue sheen and glossy, rounded buttons. The main menu, for instance, appears friendly and accessible, like a selection of relaxing TV channels. This contrasts other menus from the 2000s, like Metroid Primes, which give off an edgier, dystopian vibe. The Wii's flagship titles maintained this fresh and calming aesthetic. Wii Sports Resort had the iconic Woohoo Island and a focus on water sports, and we haven't even gotten to the music. There's entire compilations of Nintendo's tunes, with everything from the Wi-Fi theme to system settings. Tracks felt futuristic and exciting, but not too intense. They were chill enough to be left on full volume in the living room while you smashed down dinner and got back to Mario Kart. This all helps the Wii feel really cohesive as a product. The music complemented the aesthetics and vice versa. In fact, this styling was one of the only good things about the later Wii U. Its menus retained these design principles, and the music was just as great. We even got this selection screen as part of the Miiverse, which offers an excellent demonstration of Frutiger Aero's glossy, rounded icons. But that's enough about the Wii. It didn't have Halo, and trying to play GoldenEye via Wiimote convinced me that I was cognitively impaired. Xbox 360, on the other hand, was where capital G gamers did battle. Naturally, it didn't escape these design trends either. Take one look at the menu screen and you'll pick up on some of the same elements. The logos are glossy, easy to navigate, and vibrant. Windows Media Center stands out nicely, with a rounded green gradient as the backdrop. A common theme in this era was nature. Interfaces shown incorporate it in a non-invasive and harmonious way. Take a look at this Kinect background, for example, with its huge circular skylight and a door opening onto a grassy field. This made the tech come across as familiar and approachable. Mirror's Edge from 2008 is another example of a game featuring this aesthetic. You can see it in office spaces like these, having grassy floors and decoration. So, why was this style so popular in games and consoles? Well, it mirrored a much larger movement that extended far beyond gaming. After all, this was around the time of Windows Aero, the design language used for Windows Vista. Companies were trying to make UI less intimidating by combining it with real-world concepts that people already understood, like nature and film. In theory, a menu like this should be easier to navigate and more inviting. I've got a lot of videos that go over this in greater depth, so check them out if you like this kind of design. It's one thing to talk about the design of games themselves, but the community at the time was just as interesting, and a lot different from today. In this image, if you weren't distracted by the guy duct taped to the fucking ceiling, you might recognize this as being a LAN party. LAN, or local area network parties, were gatherings where people would bring their PCs or consoles to one location and play under the same network. This allowed for a semi-stable multiplayer experience at a time when high-speed internet wasn't widely accessible. Now, while people still host these today, the community is far smaller and more niche. We'll get into why exactly in a moment. Regardless, popular choices in the 2000s were games like Halo CE, Half-Life 2, and Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos. These typically offered fast-paced multiplayer modes from PvP to PvE. I'll pause for a second here to clarify that these were pretty huge, despite not always being an easy undertaking. You'd have to carry your tower, monitor, keyboard, and 15 packets of Doritos to your mate's basement just to get things started. CRT monitors aren't light, which made things all the more difficult. Of course, LAN parties weren't simply small, sweaty gatherings at someone's house. Large-scale events, which have been going on since the 90s, have drawn much larger crowds. The biggest of these is DreamHack. Like many LAN parties, it started as a small group of schoolmates. They'd play games together in the basement of their school before transitioning to larger venues as the occasion became more and more popular. By the early 2000s, they were hosting in massive arenas with thousands of attendees. This photo conveys their scale, but fortunately not the smell. These kinds of events are still ongoing, if you know where to look, but smaller LAN parties are becoming a thing of the past. People are no longer carting their setups over to a friend's house to play multiplayer games. It's far easier to connect online thanks to faster and more reliable internet connections. Unless you live in Australia. This video has been uploading since August. Anyway, I think the decline of LAN parties took with it a significant social aspect of gaming. There's something special about physically playing with someone, even if it's just with split screen. You can actually see people's reactions. This isn't the same as voice chat, which itself is a ghost of its former, glory.
Yum 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 yum, I eat dick all day. Yum 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 yum, I eat dick. You wanna fight dick all day?
We've already established that online gaming was in its early stages, but things were rapidly evolving. By the mid-2000s, Pandora's box had been well and truly opened. The competitive scene changed forever, and we got things like voice chat, microtransactions, and their consequences. To understand how this influenced the look and experience of gaming as a whole, it's time to go back. The year is 2002. You've just bought an Xbox from GameSpot, and on the way out you grab one of these. At home you pull out the jankiest mic known to man and a disc giving you access to a strange new subscription, Xbox Live. It might seem pretty insignificant now, but this was a pretty huge deal back then. You suddenly had a gamer tag that was the same across every game, a friends list, voice chat, and the ability to play with people all across the country with a single button. Yes, the initial selection of games wasn't groundbreaking, but this was quick to change. As things started taking off, one series remained the center of attention: Halo. The second game had so much hype around it that it was covered in the news, having a massive midnight release and over 2 million sales before the end of the day. Bungie had absolutely delivered, and you could play it on Xbox Live right out of the box. To no surprise, the multiplayer used these features well. Proximity chat made the game highly social, encouraging interaction with both your teammates and the enemy. This is all but dead today, but the high skill ceiling remained consistent. Halo 2's multiplayer had combos, quick reload, the battle rifle, and sword lunges. If you weren't good, you were in trouble, and people would let you know. Naturally, Halo 2 quickly became a staple in Major League Gaming, being the focus of tournaments in the early 2000s. It goes without saying, but Halo heavily propelled the growth of esports and earned its position in the mainstream. Over on PC, things were changing as well, and another game genre was rising through the ranks. I couldn't not mention them, so we finally arrived at MMOs. Two names come to mind: RuneScape and, of course, World of Kung Fu. World of Warcraft dropped in 2004. It wasn't the first of its kind, but it was easily the biggest. Players flocked to Azeroth from all over the globe, peaking at 12 million during Wrath of the Lich King. It had a vast open world, engaging quest system, and robust social features. Guilds and raids, for example, fostered a sense of community that incentivized players to talk about the game and keep coming back. Going further, it created one of the earliest viral videos.
Alright, thumbs up. Ready, guys? Let's do this. Leroy Dragons!
Coming from a raid in 2005, this short clip sits at over 24 million views, and that's on a re-upload. Surprisingly, this was actually faked, and you can find outtakes online.
Do this. Leroy Dragons!
At least he had chicken. RuneScape was the other behemoth of early 2000s MMOs. Released in 2001, it functioned and looked a whole lot different to World of Warcraft. You could count the number of polygons on each character and still have a couple fingers down. However, where RuneScape excelled was in its freedom. There were so many different quests, skills, and activities that you weren't locked down to a singular path of progression. Mining, smithing, woodcutting, crafting, strength, and more were all available at launch, with other skills like farming added later in the game. Another key to its success was the fact that it was browser-based. You didn't need a crazy rig and a download to run this, just an internet connection and a working mouse. These kinds of games were incredibly successful in the 2000s, and helped popularize a lot of the trends we see today. Unfortunately, not all of these were good ones. The rise of online games gave cosmetics another, more sinister purpose: status. It wasn't just about what looked good to you, it was about how you were perceived by other players, and companies knew exactly how to exploit this. Microtransactions. They gained major traction with the rise of free-to-play MMOs. Everything from upgrades to cosmetics could be bundled, randomized, and spun for a few dollars. An early adopter of this was MapleStory, with the release of the Cash Shop in the mid-2000s. This wasn't exclusive to online games though, and it started bleeding into every other genre. I'm sure you can guess where this is going, but if not, let me introduce you to the now infamous horse armor. In 2006, Elder Scrolls Oblivion made the strange decision to announce and sell this for $2.50. Sure, this doesn't seem like a big deal today, but at the time it was a massive step towards monetizing even the most trivial aspects of a game. It offered no competitive advantage, didn't look all that cool, but people still bought it. And they never stopped. Massive midnight releases, LAN parties, physical game discs, disc drives themselves. All of these are quickly becoming things of the past, and gaming has changed a lot over the last decade. Microtransactions are par for the course, with Fortnite sustained by its item shop for the past 7 years. Going back to UI, I'm still waiting for a menu to give me the same feeling as Halo 3's. Games should feel exciting from the moment you boot them up. I don't want shop bundles being shoved in my face like Windows errors before I've even seen the title screen. Others have just become confusing, moving away from simplicity to whatever the hell this is. is. Some things, however, have remained strong. Old school RuneScape and World of Warcraft have millions of active users between them, and Halo is still a thing that exists. Even large-scale LAN parties have been kept alive by DreamHack. I also think, as a whole, a lot of people miss the low-poly aesthetics of older games and actually prefer them to the intense focus on graphical fidelity. But that's more than enough from me. If you enjoyed this video, consider subscribing because I've got a lot more on the way. And let me know what you think. Do you like where games are headed, or could we take some pointers from the past?